You're listening to the Jōrni Podcast. When the coping mechanism that gets you through the day is the same thing destroying who you are, where do you turn? Join me for today's captivating episode. This episode contains adult subject matter and some listeners may be triggered by this content. Listener discretion is advised. Hi, I'm Petra Brunbauer, and with decades of experience with sadness, pain, anxiety, and stress, I finally figured out how to leave all that behind. And this podcast shows you how to break free permanently so you can reclaim your sanity and find the self-esteem and energy to go after the life you desire. With real talk about mental health, holistic healing, and the tough journey of coming out the other end. This is the Jōrni Podcast. Welcome to today's episode. Before I introduce today's guest, I wanted to take a moment and let you know that I will be speaking at the upcoming Trauma Super Conference. If you've been following this podcast and our work at the Jōrni, you might know how humbled I am to be sharing my work on functional freeze alongside so many incredible experts, and I'm also very excited. You can find the details on how to sign up for free on thejorneyevents.com, and the conference is live online from January 26th until February 1st. Now, without further ado, let's meet today's guest. What do we reach for when the life we built stops working? When creativity vanishes and the world shrinks down to something unbearable? The path back from that edge can look nothing like we expect, and sometimes it starts with a commitment we make to ourselves about where we will show up and what we refuse to bring there. Poochigian is a poet, classic scholar, and translator who lives and writes in New York City. His many translations include Stung with Love, a translation of Sappho, and Marcus Aurelius' Meditations. His work has appeared in such newspapers and journals as the Financial Times, the New York Review of Books, and Poetry Magazine. Let's meet Poochigian. Hi, Erin. It's great to have you on the podcast today. I've been looking forward to getting to chat with you because Healing in the Heart of Nature, I find it's such a great title for our episode today. And boy, do we have a lot of things to chat about within that. I am so grateful that you're here today to join me. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Petra.
Absolutely. I can't wait to hear more about your story and how everything has come together because I think our audience will be very curious to hear. So would you like to start us off maybe with a little bit about yourself and the parts of your journey or your story that you feel connect to where you are today, and maybe let our listeners to know a little bit about what you do today as well?
Got it. Thank you for asking. I have been a poet since I was 18 years old. I was sitting out front of the ivy-covered English department building at my undergraduate institution, and I was reading in this humanities textbook the beginning of a poem in Latin. I didn't know Latin, but it was Virgil's Aeneid, and it started Armo virumque cano Troiae qui primus aboris in Latin, and I had a religious experience. Like the sky became brighter and the grass became greener, and I just knew that I was supposed to be a poet. And as I've said, that's what I've done since then. It's been financially precarious, certainly, but I've figured out ways to do it. I've always put a lot of pressure on myself to perform creatively. I prided myself on never getting writer's block. And yes, I was doing well going about my career as a poet. I used to be a man about town. I'd write all day and then in the evening go out to plays or poetry readings or whatever. And then COVID hit. And suddenly, yes, we were in lockdown. You could go outside, but there weren't any events going on. And that's what hit me hardest. There was nothing to look forward to. And so in order to to just get through the humdrum days during lockdown, I confess I did eventually reach out to a drug dealer to buy cocaine. I had tried it in the past recreationally, and I'd always told myself it was good I didn't have access to it because I would become addicted to it. And yes, within a few weeks, I was doing it every waking moment. And I did that during lockdown for about a year and a half. There were horrible health repercussions in that I had a permanent sinus infection and I couldn't breathe through my nose. I didn't breathe through my nose for a year and a half. And certainly I became isolated. I cut myself off from friends and because partly I didn't want them to see what had become of me. I had gone downhill in terms of my appearance, but also because I wasn't able to freely do my drugs when I was around them. And so eventually I did have to go visit my mom, and I confessed my addiction. And I decided it was time then to stop, that this cocaine could give me a heart attack. It was not really a sustainable plan. But what really got me to decide to stop doing cocaine was that I dried up creatively. I told you I put that pressure on myself to perform, and I ran out of ideas. My world collapsed to the four walls of my apartment and to a walk to the corner deli. I had no new experiences to draw on, and so I was just entirely up in my head, going over regrets about the past and worrying about how to get money for drugs in the future. And so I decided to make a radical lifestyle change. I tried a bunch of different kinds of meditation, and I have nothing but respect for all of them. Transcendental meditation as well. But the problem was my mind is too hyperactive, and I couldn't get myself to calm down and do, say, transcendental meditation. I stumbled upon then a kind of meditation called Shinrin Yoku in Japanese. It means forest bathing. And it's not just walking in the forest, it's walking in the forest with intentionality. That is, itemizing each of the things your five senses are taking in at any given moment. And so I decided I would do that forest bathing 2 hours a day to get started and to get me back in touch with the world, because I was, as I said, sucked up into my head. And at first, I couldn't go to an actual wilderness to do this because I live in a very dense Manhattan. And so I went with the next best thing, Central Park, which ended up being, in some ways, even better than natural wilderness. It has a greater concentration of tree species and bird species and different kinds of landscapes. And so I would go to the park. Yes, during COVID lockdown, eventually I stipulated 2 hours, and the rule was I kept it pure. I kept my time in the park sacred, that I couldn't be high when I was in the park. And eventually then I started these meditation sessions. I was very bad at meditating in the park, doing Shinrin Yoku at first. I was easily distracted. I couldn't sustain my attention for longer than, say, 30 seconds. But eventually I built up meditational stamina and was able to go much longer. I also started writing in a diary about Central Park. And there are different kinds of writing. There's writing you do for yourself that's therapeutic for you and that you have no intention of publishing. And then there's writing for other people. The Central Park project started out as something I was doing therapeutically for myself alone. But eventually I had two sections near each other who complemented each other, who talked to each other. And so I realized, yes, that I could get a book out of this project, and it would be not just a poetic celebration of the park, but a guide for those who need it, a guide for people who feel overworked, who feel exhausted, depleted, deflated. It could serve as a guide for them to show them how to, yes, re-engage with the world and replenish themselves through experiences in Central Park.
Wow. Thank you for sharing your story up to this point. And it feels so much happened in your life in different kind of ways, different ways that challenged you. And of course, a big part of the lockdown that affected so many of us on work level, creative level, relationship level. So I really can relate to the fact that you were looking for something to support you during that time. And even though that ended up being a drug dealer, that was part of that process of finding something. So thank you for sharing that. I do feel like a lot of us can relate to that. And when you lost your creative writing spark through the, I want to say, coping mechanisms that you were trying to find. What was it that actually made you stop at one point and go, wow, I need to maybe adjust this a little bit differently? Or how did you stumble across this forest bathing piece that then made you reorient a little bit? I feel like there needs to be some kind of awareness or a desire to want to change something at some point. And how did that come about for you, as coming from the drug addiction into something needed to change?
Yes. I think of my plugged sinuses, sorry to bring it up, it's gross, but as symbolic of my whole orientation toward the world, that I was blocked off and unable to appreciate the joy of life. Just going out in the street and seeing pretty things and being happy. I needed to radically get myself out of my head. And yeah, it was like I was plugged up and stuck in my head. And so it was a desire. Yes, it was a creative desire more than family or friends, a need to be able to write again. And I wanted to get back to the fundamentals. And that means writing about what your senses are taking in. You can't get more fundamental than that. And so I did that. And I remember that as I was curtailing my drug use, because I was going to the park more often, there was one spring day on Cherry Hill, which has a bunch of Yoshino cherry trees from Japan. They let loose very bright pink blossoms in the spring, and they have an amazing smell. They smell almonds taste. And so when I was finally able to catch that smell after not smelling anything for years, I realized, yes, that I was on the right track and that I didn't want to go back. And that became a symbol for my whole orientation toward the park, right? This absolute openness of my senses to take in representative details of the park.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And when you describe that, I can smell the trees as you're describing them, because I have smelled the cherry trees before. So yes, you're right. Coming back to these fundamentals and reconnecting with your creativity is a huge part of our lives. And I do believe that creativity is also a big part of our mental and physical health. And when we get cut off from that, has all sorts of repercussions, as you also experience. And what would you say to our listeners who some of them might be struggling with those same challenges, that they're cut off from their own creativity, or they're cut off from their inspirations or their experiences in some kind of way? How did you motivate yourself to keep doing this day after day, to keep reconnecting, to keep going back to Central Park, and to keep finding that connection out of what was going on?
Yes. The major realization that I had actually had to do with another concept in addition to Shinrin Yoku. I'm fascinated by the Freudian concept of regression in service of the ego. It sounds like a painful process, but it's a good thing. Regression means going back to being a child, and in service of the ego means that it's serving your surface personality. Basically, what regression in the service of the ego is play for adults, childlike play for adults. And Central Park has a lot of attractions for children. There's the zoo, there's the great Alice in Wonderland statue, there's the Hans Christian Andersen statue, and there are all these, yes, delightful activities for children. But part of the reason of the book, my book, Four Walks in Central Park, was to encourage adults to give up their inhibitions and play. And so a climactic moment in the book is when an adult is riding the carousel in Central Park. Adults can ride it too, and the Wurlitzer music is going on, and it represents just a moment of complete abandon, of giving up all adult inhibitions and vanishing into the park. And yes, what eventually supplanted my cocaine use was a serious meditation practice in the park, and also then reverting to this childlike state. The longer I've been an artist, the more I've learned that it has less to do with learning rules than it does with unlearning rules, with forgetting confining adult ways of looking at the world, getting rid of those and getting rid of one's inhibitions and looking at the world like a child again. That's what I felt And that's what I wanted to encourage in the book.
Yeah. Coming out of that cage that sometimes we build for ourselves, like you said, with all these rules and expectations that are going on, it can be such a freeing experience. And coming back to childlike play, I feel it's one of those things that can really nourish our soul on this level that we don't usually get because we're caught up with work and family dynamics and making money and all those things. So that sounds wonderful, actually, just sitting on the carousel and enjoying that time in the present moment. And I really want to encourage our listeners, maybe at this point, to look at some of the things in their lives and where they could add childlike play to their days and really find some activities that just light them up, make them laugh, and make them come into the present without worrying about the things that are going on in life at that moment. So that's a fantastic idea. And thank you for sharing that. You touched on the fact that you had difficulty meditating in the beginning, and I can relate to that because I was the exact same way. And even now, I really like active meditations because I like moving and things like that. How did you find that path to eventually incorporating meditation into your day or into your practice? Was it incremental? You just kept at it for day after day? Or was there something that you discovered that actually helped you incorporate that in your specific way that helped and supported you?
I tried a bunch of different kinds of meditation in my life, and also when I had decided to recover from cocaine. But my problem with them, and no doubt I was doing them wrong. I don't want to slander any kind of meditation. No doubt I was doing it wrong, but I wasn't able to sustain attention. What I did learn, though, that was very useful from transcendental meditation is not to swat at your thoughts. If thoughts encroach on the meditative state, don't get agitated and swat at them and try to get them out of your head. Just notice them and then bounce back to your meditative state. Yes, I had someone tell me once that meditation isn't the achieving of an elevated state of mind. It's actually the process of returning to your focus. That is the nature of the meditation. And to that, yes, making that the process, I was able to do meditation that I found satisfying. But still, I can sustain my attention now for 3, 4, 5 minutes, which is pretty good in terms of just taking in sensory information. But early on, I had to let myself break from the meditative state to write notes. That's a no-no in forest bathing. You're supposed to stay fully in the meditative state. But I'm such a writer that I couldn't help it. And yes, it was those original notes I took on the park that inspired me to become like a naturalist, to be able to identify trees, and I can do some bird calls now and some birds. And so that was part of the excitement of the process as well, in that it's like I was taking a seminar on Central Park. I wish I could go back to undergraduate school. That was paradise. I'm teaching this semester, and I gave my students bad advice. I told them never to graduate from undergraduate school, just to stay there and keep taking classes and cool things every semester from now on. And that would be paradise. And so I had this paradise of the new seminar in Central Park, and I had Central Park there, yes, as its own paradise.
Yeah. Oh, I remember back fondly to my undergraduate times, so I can connect with you on that. I don't think it was bad advice. I think it came from the heart. Yeah, wouldn't that be awesome to just keep taking things that really light us up and learn about them? And really, that's an exciting part of life, is that journey of discovery. And I think that's part of your creativity as well, as when you said you stopped having new experiences that brought you back to that creativity. And that was one of the parts that changed for you. Those inputs and those things that really excite us are a big part of being creative. And I just wanted to ask, because you mentioned before that when you became addicted to cocaine, you also isolated yourself, and it became hard to have relationships because for various reasons involved with the drug use. So what can you tell our listeners about if they're struggling with something and they feel like it needs to be hidden or they need to isolate themselves to deal with this? Was there a benefit to actually eventually opening up about that and sharing that? Was there any healing in that for you, or did that change anything for you?
Thank you for asking that question. That's one of the hopefully most useful bits of information I can give to the audience. And so if there's someone out there who is suffering or who is addicted to some drug, I was arrogant in my misery. I felt that it defined me, that it made me special, that the universe had singled me out to suffer. And I was this martyr who was suffering in the world. I had that attitude. And as I said, that made me arrogant about my misery. What I want to encourage is anybody who's suffering in a similar way and feels that their sufferings define them, don't let them do that. I understand when you're depressed, you get some self-esteem by feeling that your miseries are unique and special. And so it's hard to fight off, but I want to encourage everyone who feels that way to go and listen to other people. That yes, my addiction story was like I learned the addiction story of many others. And they all pretty much have the same trajectory. For the first six months, the drug solves all your problems. For the next 6 months, you need it to feel normal. And then for the last 6 months, you need it to keep from crying. And then it's definitely time to quit. And so, yes, for the audience out there, again, I just want to give that message is you don't let your suffering define you and be what makes you special, right? There are other things that make you special. Diseases and psychological conditions, right? You share them with many people.
Yeah, that's really a good point. And how did that affect your family dynamics? Did you find support in actually sharing this? Did you find support also from your family? Or did you actually choose to connect with groups or maybe even online groups or other kind of associations out there that helped you through this? Or did you actually just decide to quit one day and just kind of went from there? Because I feel like everyone's story is very unique in that sense. So how did that play out for you and how did that affect the relationships in your life?
Got it. Yes, there were a number of events that coalesced to make me realize that I had to quit. But one of them is that I did a line of cocaine. I felt like I was going to have a heart attack, but I did another one just a few seconds later. And I realized that if I kept doing it, I would die. As I said, I'd isolated myself from friends and family, yes, for a couple reasons, because I'd gone downhill and was looking rough and they could see that I was a drug addict if they just met me. And also because I was doing cocaine every waking minute and couldn't stand the thought of not being able to do it. And so it was eventually drug addicts don't like to fly because they often can't take their drugs on the plane. And so when I flew out to California and it went through withdrawal symptoms, I confessed my addiction to my mom. She had suspicions already. She's a very wise woman. And it was with her support that I eventually started talking to others. But at Central Park, primarily, that is I credit with getting me over my addiction. It was the sacred time I spent there in Central Park. But my family's been nothing but supportive and understanding. And I, love them for that. And it's been good to get to know them again. There were a number of years when I had no contact with any of them. And I want to have family in my life. I want to, as I get older and as they get older, I want them to be there. And yes, that's another great reason that cocaine is gone, is that I can fully give myself away to investing in relationships with family and friends again. Yes, cocaine, it's hollow. It gave me excitement. It's like artificial excitement you can snort into your being, right? But eventually, and evidenced by my creative sterility, eventually it's an empty excitement. It's an artificial and hollow excitement. And so I was very ready to move on to something more exciting, like Central Park and all the trees in it. Very ready.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I'm glad you had that support network and you found that support in your family as well. And share with us a little bit about the Central Park experience. So I don't know how many of our listeners have been to Central Park or know about Central Park, but share a little bit about your experience when you decided to dedicate these 2 hours to coming to the park. Was this every day you're dedicating 2 hours?
Yes, it was every
Okay.
day in the beginning in 2021 when I started going during COVID.
Okay.
Yes, I would go and I would lean myself up. It was had to be a tactile experience. I would feel the bark of the tree and then lean my back up against it and try to disappear into both the fauna, the trees and plants, and if talking about a lake, the algae, and then also the flora, and then also the fauna, like the geese, for example, who hiss at you if you get too close. I'm pretty fond of the geese as well. And it was very intentional then, right? I wouldn't swat at my distracted thoughts, but I was, yes, firm when it came to focusing on the sensory impressions of the park. Most, they're primarily visual, and then you get auditory. And eventually, with the tree bark, I got tactile and also the smells. Smells are particularly rich for memory, for triggering memory. And so the smells of fir trees, for example, and I mentioned the cherry trees, getting lost in all of that. And I'd try to sustain it, I said, 4 or 5 minutes before I would let myself jot something down in my notebook, and then back to meditation again. Also, then, the park is particularly, as I said, it's rich in a variety of environments. I would go out to get variety in my sessions. Sometimes I would go to Sheep Meadow on the southwestern edge of the park, just a meadow to hang out in. It used to actually have sheep on it from the late 19th century until the 1930s. There was a flock of sheep and a shepherd on Sheep Meadow, and you couldn't walk on it. It was a living picture for you to look at. But there's Sheep Meadow there, and that contrasts then with rocky eminences like Vista Hill or Summit Hill. And so within the same meditation session, I could get radically different kinds of meditation. Central Park actually used to be cruddy land. It was swampy and it had rock all over it. And so during the construction in the 1850s, a lot of rock had to be dynamited out, like to make Sheep Meadow, for example. But the cool thing is that there are bits of Manhattan bedrock that shoot up out of the rock and make little mountains, such as Vista Hill and Summit Hill. And that is the raw bedrock of Manhattan, a metamorphic rock sticking out of the ground. And yes, it is a variable and romantic landscape. And I talked about how I would ease myself into it, going from shallower impressions to deeper impressions the more time I was there.
Yeah. And I imagine New York also has the four seasons, right? So it changes depending on when you go there during the year. You get different impressions again and maybe different smells depending on whether it's spring or fall or winter time. You guys get snow as well, right? So having these different impressions of the landscape and these different also tactile experiences as you were walking and touching things. I feel like this is a magical place at the Central Park where you can have so many different kinds of experiences that really, I think in a way they force you to come back into the present moment, come out of your head into your body and really be present in what you're experiencing. And you said before that you were actually living also in your head a lot during that time. So I feel this nature experience, it really pushes you to come back into your body and start living from that embodied presence. So I feel like that's a really amazing way to bring healing into your life. And have you experienced this kind of, I want to say, healing presence of nature anywhere else? Have you traveled and gone to smaller parks or maybe national parks or different places? Because obviously not every one of our listeners is going to have access to Central Park, but I'm hoping that maybe this also works with different kind of landscapes that are out there.
Yes, forest bathing, Japanese forest bathing, Shinrin-yoku, focuses on the forest because there are various chemicals and aspersions that come off of grass and trees and water that promote a meditative state. But the mindset of itemizing, of slowly taking in impression by impression and thoroughly focusing on it and understanding what it fully is, that mindset is transferable to wherever you might go. And so I'm a bit of a flaneur. I walk around New York City checking things out a lot just to go for walks. And certainly those experiences have been heightened since I've trained myself in Shinrin-yoku in the park. And yes, whereas some aspects of Shinrin-yoku don't translate to the concrete grid. Others do. And I've fallen in love with the city again. When I first moved here from the Midwest, I was bright-eyed and the streets were paved with diamonds and everything was amazing and beautiful. And then I lost that. I've lived here about 15 years now. But through my Shinrin-yoku training, I've started to fall in love with the city again. Just the various lights and events and idiosyncrasies the city features. So certainly, yes, the Shinrin-yoku skills are transferable to other environments.
Yeah, I'm thinking of maybe people living in smaller towns or in places where there's not a lot of maybe excitement or different events or so much sensory input, but honing those mindfulness skills, I think could help you even in maybe smaller towns, or even if you live out in the country, help you really be mindful of the things that are there that you may have not noticed before, just like you're falling in love with the city again and noticing different things. So yeah, this sounds like a wonderful skill to develop and actually bring into our healing journey as well. Now, do you want to share maybe your favorite place in Central Park? I'm wondering if you also put that in your book. What's your favorite place? Where do you go and feel like you're just completely connected and happy and content?
My favorite attraction in the park is the butterfly garden. It's filled with sappy, very nectarious flora. And in the spring, the butterflies come and they just pollinate like crazy. They're in and out of the plants and they're so beautiful. And what they're trying to get is sugar-based, it's nectar. And so they're like eye candy, the butterflies themselves, and they live for sugar. And so, yes, I'm in love with the butterflies and that it seems they live to be beautiful and to spread beauty through their pollination and other ways. And so they stole my heart. The butterflies stole my heart. It was a delightful passage to write because I felt I could be indulgent. I could be all about beauty because the butterflies are.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds like such a magical place. And yeah, I definitely look forward to visiting one day and experiencing what you're sharing with us on the show today. Now, for our listeners, as we wrap up, give us a little bit of an overview of your book. You mentioned the title before. Tell us the title again. And also, what can listeners expect if they go and buy your book and read your book? What can they get out of it?
My book is called 4 Walks in Central Park, A Poetic Guide to the Park. And readers coming to it can expect a fully functional tour guide. There are maps that list the various stops and attractions in Central Park, but also where it's poetry. And so it captures not all of the sensory details, but representative and hopefully resonant or meaningful associations. And so you can use the book as a fully functional tour guide, or you can use it as a substitute for going to the park in that it gives you representative sensory impressions. Yes, and so readers can expect to learn a lot about the park. It's poetry. It's a special genre of poetry that teaches things, that's didactic. And it doesn't just teach details about the flora and fauna and history of the park. It also, I hope, teaches a whole way of looking at the world, a slower way that is focused on the present moment. And I'm grateful that you brought up that present moment. I'm translating from ancient Greek the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. It's a famous Stoic text, and he is big on focusing on the present moment because we don't ever inhabit the past and we don't ever inhabit the future. We only ever inhabit the present. And that is what matters. And that's, I hope, an appreciation for sensory details in the present moment. I hope that's what my book, yes, conveys to people. It's available everywhere at Barnes & Noble, at Amazon, at your local private bookstores. Yes, 4 Walks in Central Park.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And I feel like this book can also be part of people's healing journeys as they are maybe learning their own way of coming into meditation or coming into mindfulness or finding solutions to various challenges that we're facing, mental, physical, emotional. And having a book that really elevates, as you said, these sensory details and brings you into the present moment, I feel this could be a really great addition in your own healing journey as you make your way through that and maybe vicariously live through Erin's book a little bit and explore Central Park. I'm sure there's also videos online where you could virtually line up what you're reading. So sounds like an amazing part that people can use as a resource in their own journeys as well. So thank you, Erin, for sharing your story, which has been so insightful. And thank you for sharing all this wisdom that you gathered on your journey and have put into your book and that you are now putting out into the world. I feel this is also part of your healing journey, is now sharing everything that you've experienced with the public. So thank you for joining me today. I really, truly appreciate your time and everything that you have brought to the show.
Thank you for having me, Petra. It's been delightful.
Amazing. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in today, and check out our show notes for all the links to where you can find Erin's book and the details on that. And I will hopefully meet all of you guys in Central Park one day, and we can together experience the magic of Erin's insights on that. And thanks for joining me today. Take care, everyone, and be well. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen in. If you enjoy the Jōrni Podcast, please support us by subscribing, sharing on social media, and leaving us a review. We appreciate you. And you can find more of the Jōrni on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and our website, thejorni.com. Sending you love and courage, and see you next time.